Now, Nvidia is set to report quarterly results today after the close at 4:20. Joining us for a look ahead of the key metrics to look out for is John Belton, Gabelli Funds portfolio manager. It's the top holding Nvidia is in the funds that he manages. A very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Top metric you look out for?
Revenue, always. I think we're expecting really solid numbers. Couple different dynamics under the hood, but I think this remains a supply-constrained growth story. So it's pretty amazing. If you look back at Nvidia's numbers over the last several quarters, they've added the same exact amount of revenue each quarter. What that tells me is their revenue is basically a function of how fast the supply chain can crank out product. So I think the demand environment remains very strong. That's not the issue. The question is, how fast is the supply chain able to accommodate product?
And under the surface, then, not too bothered about the bottom line and any costs that are rising?
Well, of course, I think that if we step back, Nvidia, where the stock is just below an all-time high, I think this earnings setup is a little bit different from the last couple of quarters. Expectations are very high. There's a lot of optimism around the stock. So I do think it's not revenue and nothing else. I think revenue is the most important KPI, and then we're going to need to see solid gross margins and earnings as well.
What about guidance and I guess the conversation on the earnings call in and around China?
There's a bit of, so there's a bit of, a question mark about what they will be assuming for China in the forward-looking outlook, because there's been a lot of moving parts.
How much of the business is it for you?
In the forward outlook?
Yeah.
I think they're not going to include China in the forward outlook. That's what other semiconductor peers like AMD have done. I think that is the conservative approach. I think that's the fair thing to do, given there are still uncertainties around when they're going to get some of these export licenses for the new China-compliant products.
The other thing I wanted to ask about, a broader thing, which I've seen people write about in the last 6 months, is accounts receivables increasing.
Right.
What's your take on that? Is that a risk that some of their customers are a bit behind the curve, or is it in fact misleading?
I think that situation has gotten better as time has gone on. I think we're going to see that continue to have improved in the quarter that they most recently reported. If you look at their supply chain, what those partners have been talking about in the latest earnings cycle, it seems like they've just gotten their hands around how to accommodate NVIDIA's very complex set of products. And a lot of those supply chain partners have significantly increased their expectations for output of NVIDIA's product through the balance of the year. So I think supply chain bottlenecks have gotten better, and I think you'll see those dynamics improve in this quarter.
Different question as it relates to China, which I've heard from various sources that the attempt to kind of contain China by the US hasn't worked. Their innovation has been very, very strong behind NVIDIA's, but it's catching up. What risk do you put, whether it's from China or elsewhere, that a player catches up with the scale of quality that NVIDIA has, and that pricing becomes a big issue in the next 6 months or 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could probably ask a similar question about Western competitors, too. Is anyone going to catch up to NVIDIA? I think NVIDIA's got a big lead, a big head start on all competition, particularly China. I think the most formidable Chinese semiconductor design competitors are still years behind NVIDIA. But to the earlier part of your question, if the U.S. decides to clamp down and restrict China, which it doesn't seem like they're doing anymore, there are workarounds. And I think we've seen a company like Huawei develop pretty good products that aren't quite as cost performant as NVIDIA's, but in an environment where Chinese companies are restricted from getting NVIDIA, Huawei can be a decent alternative. So that's why I think the U.S. administration is smart to allow NVIDIA to participate in China. I think we're better off if Chinese AI is built on a U.S. company's technology.
But you feel
rest of the world,
you feel
too.
like, I mean, that is a strategic, philosophical view. That is not a view that relates at all to U.S. taxpayers getting a VIG on those chips being sold.
Yeah, so you're talking about the revenue share that the administration has.
That's the nicer way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Revenue share.
I think that's a different conversation. I think strategically, yes, it is smart for the U.S. to allow Nvidia to play in China.
And that is good for America?
I think it is.
Okay, no, the reason I mention this is we go back and forth with Howard Lutnick, we spoke to, we was talking to the Treasury Secretary about this issue, which is there are times when the U.S. can do things economically that are good for the country that don't also need to capture somehow. We're not giving stuff away for, there's actually like a benefit to the country, even from a national security perspective in your mind.
That's what I think, yes.
But I just add to that from the European perspective on that. This is different. So I remember 2018, 2019, I remember talking to Mike Pence about it, that the US then wanted the UK not to use Huawei in our 5G rollout. And the UK government, Belton, it was actually a lot of cost to remove because it was already halfway down the path. The difference, I think, the US is also working with this time, why maybe opening up and working with China is better than containing it. If you look at the last 6 months and the way that trade policy has been announced, right or wrong, Europeans, including the Brits who are close to the US more than most, will look at it and say, well, why don't we just buy the Huawei chip? It's a lot cheaper. There's not the same resolute mindset to contain and block. And so you're contending with that as well in a way that perhaps you'd get more adherence the first time around.
I think in that market, there are viable alternatives to Huawei. In this market, there are not great alternatives to Nvidia.
So what portion of Nvidia's sales is non-US, though? Significant.
Yeah, I mean, it depends how you define that. I think, China is a low double-digit percentage of sales, something like that was before the rest of the world restrictions. Again, it depends. It's a little bit hard to nail it down. If you look at just the way they disclose it, it's a sizable percentage.
Yeah.